17 maids walked out. 17 left in tears. 17 couldn't bear to stay past sunrise. All because 3 6-year-old boys refused to let anyone love them. When Marisol Jones first stepped through the gates of the Blake mansion, she expected chaos. She did not expect rage, triplets screaming, furniture smashed, walls defaced in a house built on grief. "Get out!" Noah yelled, hurling a toy across the hardwood floor. Ethan and Luke flanked him, their eyes wild with loss no one dared name. They didn't want a maid. They wanted their mother back, and every woman before Marisol had run. But in that moment, staring at their broken faces, she made a promise to herself. "I will stay." Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. But the question was never just about children misbehaving. Why did the Harrington triplets drive away every maid that entered their world? What wound lay beneath their anger that made them impossible to control? Each shattered vase, each slammed door, each scream in the dark wasn't about disobedience, it was about something far more painful. Noah, Ethan, and Caleb weren't born into cruelty. They were born into privilege, into the sprawling Harrington estate with its polished floors and priceless art. But behind that wealth was silence, a silence no nanny could break. 17 women had tried, and each one left convinced the boys could not be saved. But then came Cassandra Moore. She was not from wealth, not from power, not from privilege. She had no reason to believe she could do what others could not. Yet somehow she did, and her success would soon reveal betrayals that shocked the staff, a media scandal that caught the nation's eye, and a father's hidden guilt so heavy it nearly destroyed the family. How could a woman with nothing to her name walk into the Harrington mansion and uncover the truth everyone else had ignored? Richard Harrington was 36 years old and at the height of his empire. A billionaire tech tycoon who was respected in boardrooms across the country, he had built his fortune on vision, speed, and relentless ambition. But inside the walls of his own mansion, Richard was a man undone. The same sharp mind that negotiated billion-dollar contracts was powerless in the presence of his 3 sons. 6 months earlier, tragedy had carved a wound no wealth could heal. His wife, Grace Harrington, the quiet heart of the family, had been killed suddenly in a car crash on a rainy night. The twisted wreckage was pulled from the highway before dawn, but the damage to her family would last forever. Noah, Ethan, and Caleb had not seen the crash itself, but they had seen their father crumble. They had seen their mother carried away, and in their young minds, that moment never left. Noah Harrington was the oldest by 6 minutes, and from the very first day without his mother, he became the defender of his brothers. Angry, stubborn, and unyielding, he saw every new face in the mansion as a threat. Ethan, the second-born, learned to retreat. He watched from the corners of rooms, his silence heavier than any shout. But inside, he carried a storm no one could see. And then, there was Caleb, the youngest. Smallest, gentlest, most vulnerable, he clung to memories that slipped through his fingers like water. Together, the 3 became a fortress, united in defiance, united in grief. And for 6 long months, 17 maids had walked through their door, each promising patience, each promising care, and each driven out by the boys before the first day had ended. Wealth had filled their rooms with toys, clothes, and tutors, but wealth could not buy them peace. Then came Cassandra Moore. She was 32 years old, a black woman whose life had been forged in the fires of hardship. Raised in foster care, she had grown up knowing what it meant to feel unwanted, to be shifted from one house to the next without permanence, without love. She had carried the scars of her own childhood loss for years, but instead of allowing those scars to define her, Cassandra built resilience. She understood the silence of children too angry to speak, the rebellion of those who felt abandoned, and the fragile hope of those who still longed for someone to stay. She did not come from wealth. She had no ties to power, and yet her arrival at the Harrington mansion marked a turning point no one could have predicted. But nothing in Cassandra's past prepared her for what she walked into that first day. Cassandra Moore's first morning at the Harrington mansion began not with introductions but with chaos. She had scarcely set down her bag when the echo of breaking glass rang through the hall. Following the sound, she entered the grand dining room, and what she found was destruction. A vase worth more than she earned in a year lay shattered across the marble floor. Food was smeared across the polished table, eggs dripping down the walls, juice spilled like blood across the rug. At the center of it all stood the Harrington triplets, Noah with his fists clenched, Ethan glaring from the corner, Caleb on a chair with peanut butter streaked across his face like war paint. The air vibrated with their screams, not of play but of protest. They had built a battlefield inside their own home, and Cassandra had just walked into it. Noah was the first to turn on her. He hurled a spoon across the room, its metal clanging against the wall at her side. "We don't want you," he shouted, his voice cracking from both rage and grief. Ethan's silence was more chilling, his eyes fixed and unblinking, the weight of his stare daring her to take a step closer. And Caleb, the youngest, stomped on the chair, his voice shaking as he cried, "We want Mama." The three voices collided, filling the mansion with a sound no parent could ignore, yet their father was nowhere to be seen. For 6 months, these cries had sent every maid fleeing, some left in tears, others in anger, but none had stayed long enough to see what lay beneath the fury. And now, Cassandra stood in their path, her heart pounding as every instinct told her to turn and run. But she didn't. Cassandra did something no one before her had even attempted. She stood still. She didn't raise her voice, didn't demand obedience, didn't rush to clean the mess. She lowered herself slowly into a chair, letting the storm rage around her. Her silence cut sharper than shouting, her calm heavier than command. The boys had expected a fight, expected her to scold or threaten, but instead she simply said, "I hear you." Her words startled them, though their anger did not break. Noah slammed a plate onto the floor, shards flying dangerously close to her feet. Ethan pushed over a chair with such force it nearly struck her. Caleb screamed until his voice cracked and tears streaked through the peanut butter on his cheeks. For a moment, it seemed she had lost control like the 17 women before her, that she would walk out before the day was done. But just when the chaos reached its peak, when it seemed Cassandra had joined the long list of failures, she did something no one expected. After the storm of that first morning, something unexpected began to take root. Cassandra Moore did not run from the Harrington triplets. Instead, she returned to the kitchen, wiped peanut butter from the counter, and quietly began to bake cookies. The smell drifted through the hallways like a memory of better days, and before long, Noah, Ethan, and Caleb appeared in the doorway, suspicious, but curious. She did not order them to sit. She did not bribe them with promises. She simply placed the tray on the table, broke a cookie in half, and began to eat. Slowly, one by one, the boys climbed into their chairs, drawn not by discipline, but by presence. For the first time in months, the Harrington mansion heard something other than screams. It heard the sound of children chewing in silence. A small sound, but for Cassandra, it was the beginning of something greater. She began to meet them at their level, literally lowering herself to the floor so that her eyes met theirs. Noah, the leader, resisted at first, crossing his arms and glaring, but even he was caught off guard when she asked not what he wanted to eat, but what he missed most about his mother. Ethan's silence, once a weapon, slowly became an opening as he began to whisper answers to her stories before his brothers could speak. And Caleb, the youngest, who had screamed until his voice cracked, leaned against her shoulder one evening and whispered, "Don't leave us." Each moment was fragile, each breakthrough small, but to Richard Harrington, watching from the shadows of doorways, from the top of staircases, from behind his polished desk, it was nothing short of astonishing. For the first time in half a year, his house seemed to breathe again. But peace inside the mansion did not last long outside of it. News of yet another nanny entering the Harrington home leaked to the press, and the tabloids descended like vultures. One headline captured the cruelty of the gossip. Billionaire's demon children destroy another nanny. Former maids spoke openly to reporters, describing the boys as dangerous, unhinged, even violent. One told a morning talk show that she feared for her safety. Another declared the children beyond saving. The narrative took hold, and suddenly, it was not only Richard's business on the line, but his family's reputation. For a man who had built his empire on control, the headlines cut deeper than any corporate scandal. The Harrington name was splashed across screens and papers, and the triplets were painted as monsters. In the middle of this storm, Cassandra herself became a target. Strangers online mocked her decision to stay, reporters lingered at the gates, and whispers followed her every move. Was she another failure waiting to happen, or was she truly different? Richard did not know which to believe. What he did know was that Cassandra had lasted longer than anyone else, and that frightened him. For if she stayed, if she succeeded, then the world might finally begin asking the questions he had worked tirelessly to bury. Questions about his wife's death. Questions about his son's anger. Questions about what had really happened on the night Grace Harrington never came home. And then, one evening, as Cassandra sat reading to the boys, Richard received a phone call that changed everything. The phone call came late in the evening, just as Richard Harrington had begun to believe his household might be steadying. It was his lawyer, speaking with a sharp edge of panic. The media, he said, had discovered Cassandra Moore's past. Her childhood in foster care, the years of struggle, every scar she had worked to bury. They were all about to be dragged into the light. They'll drag her name through the mud, the lawyer warned. They'll spin her story until she looks unfit to stand near your sons. If she stays, she becomes the scandal. For Richard, it seemed inevitable. Every maid before Cassandra had walked away long before the headlines came. Surely this woman would run too. But Cassandra did not run. When Richard pulled her aside, his voice low and measured, expecting resignation, he was met with defiance he had never seen in his own boardrooms. "You don't understand," she told him. "I've survived worse than gossip. Your sons aren't monsters, they're grieving children, and if you think I'll leave them now, you don't know me at all." Her words cut through the mansion like steel, and for a moment Richard found himself staring not at an employee but at an equal, a woman who had faced storms beyond his imagining and still stood unbroken. Yet Cassandra's strength did more than keep her in place. It unearthed a truth Richard had never confronted. Late one night, after the others had fallen asleep, Noah finally broke his silence in Cassandra's presence. His voice trembled with anger as he whispered, "It's his fault. Mama's dead because of him." Cassandra pressed gently, her calm inviting honesty, and the story poured out. On the night Grace Harrington died, she had not been driving home from a meeting, as Richard had always told them. She had been rushing across town to pick up a birthday gift for her husband. The storm, the crash, the sudden end, it had all been tied to that single errand. To the boys, it was unbearable. Their mother's death was not random. It was the price of their father's celebration. The revelation cut through Cassandra, but what stunned her most was the detail that followed. Caleb, the youngest, with his small voice barely audible, whispered that he had seen something that night, something he had never told his brothers, something that even Richard did not know. And when Cassandra heard his words, she realized the truth was darker than anyone imagined. Noah was the one who carried the weight longest, and it was Noah who finally spoke the words that shattered the silence. Sitting across from his father, his fists tight against his knees, he said, "Mama wasn't alone when she died. She was on the phone. With you, Daddy. She was crying." The room froze. Richard Harrington's chest tightened, his face drained of color. The truth that he had buried beneath contracts, meetings, and headlines had just been laid bare by the son who had watched him the closest. Grace Harrington had been behind the wheel that night, rushing through rain-slick streets, but she had not been driving in silence. She had been pleading with her husband as he demanded she not forget his birthday gift, demanding she stop nowhere else, demanding she not be late. And in the storm of her obedience, the crash had taken her life. For 6 months, Richard had told himself it was chance, fate, misfortune. But the boys knew better. They had carried the anger of that final phone call, their grief sharpened into blame. And now, before them, the man they once looked to for strength had no armor left. Richard's voice broke as he admitted it, admitted the pressure he had put on Grace, admitted the words he could never take back. He bowed his head, and for the first time since her death, Richard Harrington wept openly in front of his sons. Not the tears of a billionaire, not the frustration of a man losing control, but the raw collapse of a father who finally confessed his guilt. It was Cassandra Moore who steadied the room. Her voice was low but firm, carrying the weight of her own losses. "Grief doesn't destroy love," she told them. "It hides it, and now it's time to bring it back." Her words did not erase the pain, but they unlocked something long sealed. Noah's shoulders softened, Ethan's silence cracked, and Caleb climbed into his father's arms. In that fragile moment, the fortress the triplets had built against the world began to crumble not into ruin, but into healing. The Harrington mansion, once filled with shattered glass and screams, became the stage for something new. Cassandra gathered the boys in the playroom, where they began stacking blocks, pillows, and blankets. "We're building a castle for Mama," Caleb announced, and his brothers nodded. It was a structure of toys and fabric, but also of memory and love. Cassandra guided their hands, not as a servant, but as a witness, helping them give form to the mother they had lost. And when Richard stepped inside that makeshift castle, crouching low to sit beside his sons, it was not as a billionaire or a broken widower. It was as a father, finally present, finally forgiven, finally willing to begin again. The Harrington triplets weren't monsters. They were children trapped in grief. Behind the shattered glass, the broken vases, and the endless screaming, there was only pain. 3 boys who had lost their mother and didn't know how to carry the weight of that loss. And sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stay when everyone else runs away, to change everything. Cassandra Moore didn't come from wealth. She didn't have a famous name or a fortune to protect her. What she had was something money could never buy: resilience, patience, and the courage to see past anger into the wounded hearts of Noah, Ethan, and Caleb Harrington. But her choice raises questions that echo far beyond the walls of the Harrington mansion. Do you think Cassandra was right to stay? Or should she have protected herself and walked away, like the 17 others before her? Was Richard Harrington truly to blame for Grace's death? Or was it simply a tragic accident, an intersection of fate and pressure that no one could have prevented? And what about you? What would you have done if you were in Cassandra's place, standing in the center of that storm, with 3 broken children daring you to leave? These are questions without easy answers. But they are the questions that force us to look inward at our families, at our mistakes, at the places where grief and guilt collide. Because the Harrington story was never about wealth or power. It was about loss. It was about love. And it was about the extraordinary strength it takes to rebuild when the world insists you're broken forever. So now we turn to you. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We read every one of them, and your perspective makes these stories come alive. And if you thought this story was powerful, just wait until you see what we uncovered next week. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it.